Welcome to the third week of our 6-week sessions. Today we're going to touch a little bit on the back end that we did last week, and then we're going to continue and just touch a little bit on how to set up React.js with Tailwind CSS for your front end, so that you can start writing some code for your UI and some front end logic to actually work together with your backend API. So welcome to everyone who's here. It's always important to know that there's people that are consistently attending, and that is great for us. Yeah, without wasting any time, I have made some few changes in terms of the backend code that we wrote last week, right? So I just refactored the code. Basically, I didn't really change the logic. I just refactored the code just so that it's more up to par with the coding standards, the good coding practices that we see on a daily basis as we write code. So yeah, so without wasting time, let me share my screen so that I can continue with the explanation from the backend code that we wrote last week, and then we're going to spin up a RDS instance where we're going to run our Postgres as server, where we're going to actually manipulate data on that server. So the reason I've decided to move from local is that companies are most likely to be interested in your ability to use cloud services or hosting platforms like AWS. So you getting a feel of how that works and how you can go about it, I think that will add a bit of advantage to you. I think everyone can use their database on their local machine. So let's take it a step further and use the AWS RDS service, right? So basically, RDS service on AWS just stands for Relational Database Service. So we're going to run our Postgres server there, and then we're going to use our backend code to communicate with the server. Now, without wasting time, please just let me know when you see my screen. Just give me a thumbs up when you see my screen so that I can continue. Just give me a thumbs up if you can see my screen. And also, just not to forget, a shout out to Melsoft Academy for making this possible. The aim is to ensure that upcoming developers know what recruiters expect and how they can stand out with their portfolio and CVs, right? So now, and please don't worry, I've pushed all the changes that I'm speaking about to GitHub. So you will see that I pushed some changes to GitHub about 12 minutes ago and a few hours ago. So the changes that I'm going to be discussing now, they are all found on the GitHub repo, and it's available publicly for you to use however you see fit, so that you understand more on basically what we are trying to achieve and what we are building. So let me go back to the code, right? So if you remember from our backend code from last week, we had the part where a user can, a user can log in, and then they can reset their password, they can recover a password, etc. So now from there onwards, what I added was I added the ability for a user to update their details. I've added the ability for a user to view their profile as they log in. So if you are a normal user, you can view your profile, but then you can update certain information on your profile. Yeah, basically that's that. And then if you are an admin, then you can be able to delete some users and then change the user roles. For instance, you can change a user role from being the normal user to being an admin, so that they can also have admin privileges. Right. That's just one of the things that I added there. And then I've taken a step further where I've put comments so that you understand what exactly each line does in the code. So that will help you a lot, and it will show you how you actually write and document your code so that the next person that takes over your project is able to get up to speed in terms of reading your code. So that's what we call code readability. I can be able to follow your code, what it does step by step. Right. So now another perfect thing that I added, another thing that I saw that it was important for me to add is that I separated the configuration to our database, and then I also added error handler for on the middleware. And then I also added a logger. So basically what a logger is that it's going to show us the error messages in more details. So it's going to explain more on what is happening in terms of the errors that we are getting from the backend. Sorry about that. I just forgot to zoom in so that you are able to see a little bit on what I'm talking about. So this is the logger that I spoke about. So this is going to show us, more details on the errors that we are encountering as we are, communicating with our API backend. And then it's going to store every log error within a file that it creates, right? So whatever error that it gets, it's going to save that within this error log. So you basically created a log file for yourself so that it's easy for you to troubleshoot in terms of what is happening with your backend database code. You see, you can see here that I was encountering some errors where I had an error, and then the database connection failed because it was complaining about the no Postgres HBA, right? I'll tell you what that is. This is basically Postgres telling me that I did not enable SSL certificate, so it cannot communicate the data securely between my API and the database. So it was refusing database connection because the connection was not secure. So you will see that now it's telling you SQLized connection error. It's telling you all the other details, the code error. So now this will make it more easier for you to troubleshoot and know exactly what the issue is and where the issue, is coming from. So that's basically why I added the logger. It makes it more robust in terms of error finding and troubleshooting, right? And then now in terms of config, so this is where I actually configure the database connection, right? So I just use that .env so that I can load all the variables within the process.env so that I can use it within my code base. And then I just set up and verify all the variables if they are present. For instance, if all the .env variables that I've set up actually do exist, because I'm going to iterate through that required environment variables. And if they do exist, then I can start the database connection and create and also load my JWT secret, right? So that's basically that. And then from there, this is where the error handling will come in, right? So on the middleware. So if there's an error and I need to pass the error to the front end, this is where the error handling will come in. So basically here, I've got an error handler. It will determine the HTTP status code. Default is 500. So if the status code is something else, it's not 500, it's going to set that obviously to the status code. And then if the message is not known, it's just a generic message, it's just gonna say an unexpected error occurred. But then now, if there's more details on the error, it needs to tell you as the user what type of error it is, where it is, how to find it, how to troubleshoot. I'm going to console log that and show you the message on what is exactly the error, right? Then I'm just gonna return that. So to see this in actual action in terms of how this would work, let me just quickly go to that, right? So I need to, okay, just need to find it. I think it's on authentication. Yes, authentication, right? Because authentication is the one that deals with the middleware, right? So you see here, I'm requiring for the logger. The logger is there, right? I want to log whatever errors I might have or whatsoever, right? So I'm importing that so that I can use it at the later stage, right? So now from there onwards, you will see that if we can just say, let me just say, because the code is a bit long, you just say find logger, right? So there we go. So it's gonna say logger and then dot error, and then it's gonna pass the error message that the exception has catched, right? And then from there onwards, it's gonna log that, and then it's gonna say error logging in user, and then it's gonna tell you what's the error exactly, because it's going to call your logger, and then it's going to make sure that it gives you all, that it's going to post that error inside your error log file so that you can be able to, inspect it more and troubleshoot more as to what exactly went wrong with that, right? I just need to quickly find that error handler there as well. Let's do that. Right. So yeah, okay, fine. I'll explain also further on the error logger in terms as we go further on how this actually works. This will actually work on our front end so that we can get them error messages that are coming from the back end instead of just us assuming what could have happened, what went wrong. So the message that will be coming back from the back end will tell us to say what happened when we tried to authenticate through the token and whatever the next steps that went wrong. It will tell us via this middleware error handler here. So that's basically how that would work. So now another important thing that you need to do is that because we're going to be communicating with our front end and they are running within different domains, you need to enable your CORS configuration. So this is very much important. You need to enable this CORS configuration. So you're going to say app is going to use CORS, and then it's going to accept connection from localhost from port 3001. And then it's going to allow this specific methods, and then credentials will be true. So I'm going to have authorization headers like your tokens or cookies to ensure that I'm able to do that. So the middleware must know that this IP address through this port is going to send requests with these different types of methods. These are the only methods that will be allowed to cross through this origin, the different domains. And I need credentials. Just gonna put it as true because it's going to allow cookies, authorization tokens, and etc. So that's basically that. And then another important thing is for you is to enable the database, the public SSL certificate, right? So this is where you are going to find this. Otherwise, your application will not be able to connect to your RDS instance if you do not do this line here, so that you download the public according to your according to your region where you've hosted your database on AWS. You're going to come to this, you're going to go to AWS documentation, Amazon RDS user guide. Then you are going to download that certain public certificate for that certain region where your RDS is running, right? So in my case, I'm running it in US East North Virginia. So hence I downloaded this particular public certificate so that I can use that to tell my Postgres that I'm trying to connect to the database through an SSL connection, which is secure, and Postgres will allow that communication. to happen. So this public SSL certificate has already been matched with the RDS service that you are running. It's got its private certificate that is on the server that is going to use it to verify whether the public certificate is valid and it was not tampered with. That is basically how that works. If you are not sure on how certificates work, I'd recommend you go and look at PKI infrastructure in cryptography. It will explain a little bit further in terms of how this works. So without wasting time, I've imported that. I'm opening the SSL certificate. You will see I've stored it inside config because it goes hand in hand with the configuration of that. And then from there onwards, I'm just going to say I require the SSL certificate. It's required. And then there's a certificate authority, SSL certificate. That's basically that. And you will see here logging. If something happens, it goes wrong. You remember what I said, I'm going to pass the message that is wrong. Then I'm going to call my logger. Then it's going to say whatever error that I've received inside what? Inside this. So these errors, this errors where you see database connection, PH_HBA, those were errors that were coming when I had not configured the SSL certificate here. So that's what the error was telling me to say. You have not configured a secure connection to your database. So we need a secure connection. So after I resolved that, then everything went well, and then I can say, it can say database established, connection established. And then you will see here also that because of that statement here to say, what's that? I want to see the log on everything that is happening on my database. I want to see it here as it happens, updated, whatever. If I select the user, it's going to tell me on the terminal what exactly I'm doing on the database, right? So yeah, that's basically that. So let me just stop the server for now. Yeah, just stop the server for now. Right. So now that's basically that. So those are the changes that I've made to the backend code from the last week's session, just to make it more robust and so that it adheres to the coding standards that we have, right? So we are building up on this. We're refactoring some of the code so that it's more reusable, and that the next user can actually reuse it easily and understand it easily, right? So that's basically that. Now, I want to go back to the .env file, right? So you will see here on the .env file, you'll remember the last time I had localhost, right? The last time we had localhost here. So this was telling me that I'm connecting to a local server that is running on my local machine. But now, because we're going to use a database service that is running on the cloud on AWS, hence you see this very funny long name here. So this is the IP address to our RDS server. So you will see how you get this address when you set up your RDS instance and you run your Postgres server on that RDS instance, right? So you will see that I've got this. This is where I'm hosting my Postgres. This is the DB username. I had already created this. And then this is the DB password. This is the DB name. And then this is the JWT secret that I've got, right? But now the nice thing about this is the .env file. So you will see that if I come to my GitHub repo where I push the changes to my code, you will see that we do not have the .env file here. So my secrets are safe. So even if you come to my code now and try and want to access my AWS instance database and whatsoever, you will not get the .env file because it has been what? It's been I've made sure that it's protected and it's not accessible to the public. because it's only left on my local machine when I push the entire code to GitHub. All thanks to this bad boy here, .git ignore. So .git ignore, it knows that when I push to GitHub, it has to ignore everything that I list in here that I feel is sensitive data. For instance, the node modules are unnecessary for me to push to GitHub. I just excluded them. And then the .env that holds my secrets to the resources that I utilize. And then now the important thing that you must know when you configure your continuous development and continuous integration is you have to go to your settings on the repo that you are working on, and then you go to your secrets and variables, and then you go to the actions, and then you can go to your repository secrets or environment secrets. That's where you are going to reset up what? You're going to reset up the variables that you've got stored in your .env file. And the nice thing about this GitHub part is that even if someone has got access to your code, because it's public, they won't have access to those secrets, and they are not found anywhere on your code. So it makes it nice, and it protects your secrets on the services that you use. Right. So let's quickly go to RDS first, so that we can be able to set up a RDS instance and actually run a Postgres server on that, PostgreSQL on that. So basically, you just need to come here and you go. Oh, before I go to that, a very strong disclaimer on AWS services is that every time when you use resources on AWS for cost purposes, please always terminate the resources that you commission. Like for instance, for me, because well, I can afford, because I use it all the time, this thing, I can afford to pay the dollars and all that monthly. So for you, if for instance you spin up resources like RDS and you make a mistake and you actually spin up a production, you spin up actually a production environment, it's going to charge you. You might end up owing a lot of dollars to AWS. So you must always use the free tier services that are assigned to you when you open the account. Please use the free tier, and also with the free tier, please terminate the services after you test out and you utilize them, because they're going to accumulate certain fees as you go along. I think I saw a hand. Is there anyone who wants to say something? Okay, I think there's no question. Right. Anyway, yeah. So very, very important. Always, like for instance now, if I go and I want to, let's say I've spinned up EC2 instances and I've got a lot of instances that are running, but I'm not using them. It's always safe for me to actually terminate the EC2 instances, so that I don't incur costs, unnecessary costs, because I'm no longer using them for testing or whatsoever. So it is very important to keep that in mind, so that at the end of the month you are not surprised when AWS sends you an invoice. Very, very much important. As you see here, I've got a NodeStack, the one that we were using the first time in the first week, that is still running. Because it's free tier, and then I'm not doing anything, there are no clients that are actually accessing this server, this EC2 instance. So it's not incurring fees, because I've set it up in the free tier environment, right? So yeah. So for instance, if you want to stop it, you can just select it, then go to actions, instance state, and then you can just say terminate, and then that will ensure that you don't incur sorry about that, guys. That will ensure that you don't incur costs, unnecessary costs. Right, yeah, that's just a disclaimer that I wanted to put out there. So now, because we want to spin up an RDS instance, so I'm just gonna go to services because it's my favorite. I usually use it a lot. It's just gonna appear here, recently visited. But then if you can't see it there, you can just search it on the task, say RDS, then it's going to come out, and then you're going to just click on it. I would recommend you doing the foundational AWS certificate for you to understand the basics of all the services that AWS offers. So you know what to use or what is it that you need for certain things. Because at the moment, I'm just talking about RDS instance, and a lot of you are like, what is an RDS instance? So the first level of the foundational certificate for AWS is going to give you all the terminologies and all the services. It's basically easy, it's theoretical. They just explain what the services do. So I do recommend that for you to do that certification. For those who have got the means, it's around about 900 to 1,000 rand, depending on the exchange rate in dollars, for you to book the exam. Yeah. Anyway, without wasting time, let's go. And then you're just gonna click on DB instance, and then it's going to show you all your database instances that are running currently. So this is the database instance that we'll be using, that I've set up already, because it takes quite some time to set up an RDS instance. So I'm just gonna show you the steps on how you create it, but I've already created one for today's lesson so that you can be able to see and follow through. So since you've listing all your databases, you can have a lot of databases that you are using. You can have a database for different apps or applications that you are using. It's up to you. So now you're just gonna click on create database. After that, it's going to show you this page. And then because you're still new to AWS, I recommend leaving it at standard create, because it's going to set up all the basic configurations for you that you need. So the engine options that you've got, AWS has installed, you've got the MySQL Aurora compatible, then you've got the Aurora PostgreSQL compatible, you've got MySQL, you've got MariaDB, you've got PostgreSQL, you've got Oracle, you've got Microsoft SQL Server, you've got IBM DB2. So these are the database engines that AWS currently offers. But remember, now we are looking for what? We are looking for PostgreSQL. So we're going to select PostgreSQL, right? That's what we need. And then you're just going to scroll down, and then you will see there it's going to select the engine version that you need. And then I'd recommend leave it at the highest one that they've got. But if you are advanced and you know exactly what you need, then you will select all the previous versions that support your application or whatsoever, right? Then we go to the basic settings now. Your DB cluster identifier. So you can rename your database. So it's, in this case, by default, it names it as database 1. Yeah. And then, then you can go to the credentials settings. Credential settings, you'll see that it's going to assign Postgres as the default master username, right? You can change it if you want to have a different name for your master, but I usually just leave it at that. And then later on, I can create different usernames so that I always know the master password username, because sometimes you have a lot of things going on and we forget. So if you always remember that the master is Postgres, then you will always know. Then you're just gonna leave it here at managed in AWS Secret Manager, the most secure. I don't want to have to create a lot of things for the purpose of today's class. And then AWS Secret Manager, just leave it at default. And then you'll see here DB instance class, just leave it at default there as well. I think I missed something. Sorry about that. I missed something very, very important. On templates, my apologies, on templates, you'll see here, you've got production, you've got dev or test, you've got free tier. Production is going to charge you a lot of money if you select that, because it's saying you are deploying to the production environment where you're actually having users use your application. So you'll see it uses defaults for high availability and fast, consistent performance, because you don't want to find your application downtime being high. So hence on production, money you pay for that service. You've got the dev test. This instance is intended for development use outside of production environment. And then you've got the free tier. This is where you are playing, guys. This is where we are playing, right? You will see that on free tier, you don't have multi-zone availability for the DB cluster. But if I go on production, you see I've got all this available. You see. Then if I go on test, some of them are not available, you see. But then if I go on free tier, it's just gonna spin up an RDS instance on one region. So if that region is down, it means my app is down. But this is sufficient for us because we're trying to test this out. We're not really looking for other things, right? I really forgot about this. Very important, guys. Free tier, right? Then now you're going to enter your master password for the master username. Always remember the password. You can auto-generate the password. You can auto-generate a password. Sorry about that. You can auto-generate a password. Confirm that password, and then you will see where is the other part. Right. Okay. Then you scroll down. The rest you leave them. You don't need to fiddle around and change them because these are defaults for your free tier account, right? It's going to assign 20 gigabyte storage for the database, general purpose SSD. Very, very important with that. Yeah. Then connectivity, another important part. Connectivity is very important. So you will see here it's going to say, do you want to connect a compute resource? Remember, we spun up what? An EC2 instance where we're going to be running what? Our API. But for now, our API is going to be running locally. I don't want to run it on an EC2 instance. We're going to leave it at don't connect. Then at the later stage, we're going to connect and also still configure that CI/CD pipeline. So by the end of this 6 weeks, so that everything works, and then we establish a CI/CD pipeline. Right? These are just defaults that you leave. Then now another important part is, do you want public access to your database? Yes, we want public access to our database. So if you say no, only services that are within AWS will be able to access your database. So only applications that will be running on AWS services will be able to access your database. So if I say it's public, hence it's making me to use what? PG admin. So now because it's public, I can use it in this form to access the database and manipulate it on my local machine. I don't have to go and log in on AWS console, right? So I can just use something like the management tool for Postgres, which is something like this. You will see currently I've actually connected to the one on AWS, because if I go on properties, you will see this is the database name, the username, and then if I go on all these other things, the parameters and stuff. Let's see. Okay, here it's not showing me that. Let's on the server there directly, not on the database. You will see there the server name. I just named it that. The connection string, you can see it's what? It's the same as my API backend. So yeah, you will see that's if you were connecting to the Postgres that's running on your local machine, here you will replace this with localhost so that it knows that I'm connecting to the local machine Postgres. But for now, it knows that, oh, I'm connecting to the one that's running on AWS. It's hosted on AWS, right? So this is currently what I have on the database. I've got this table. I've got everything there, the users table, and this is currently what I have. And my users are, I've got 2 normal users and 1 admin, right? It's fine. Let's go back here. And then here, I would say choose an existing VPC. All these things that I'm mentioning here, guys, will make sense if you do the AWS fundamentals course, the entry level one, so that you understand a little bit more on what a VPC is. So basically, it's just a security group, a firewall to tell your services to allow what type of connections from which origin, so that it increases security. So for instance, now if this is public and then I'm running, I've got a domain name where I'm hosting my server, where I'm hosting my front end, then I will come here on the VPC. I'll make a rule to say only this domain can connect to my database, so that if another person tries and imitates my domain, it will know that no, this is not the right domain for me to accept connections from, and it will drop the connection. So only my domain that I specified will be able to connect to the RDCS instance. So yeah, that's about that. And then you've got the certification authority. This is where that certificate I was telling you about, this is the private one that it's creating. You will see that it's expiring when? 2061, May 26, right? So now this is very important because it's going to allow my application to connect with the public SSL certificate that it has given me, and it will verify it using the private certificate that is stored within the RDS instance. Yeah, that's about that. The rest you're just going to leave as default. I don't want to complicate a lot of things. And then from there, when you're done, you're going to click on create database, and then you will see it's going to create the database for you. But I'm not going to click on create because I already have a database instance that's running. I just wanted to take you through the options on how you actually set up an RDS instance and create one. So now I'm just going to go back to the RDS instance menu, and then I'm going to go to my DB instance. And then after it has created, it's going to list it here. And then it's going to show you the status. If the status is available, it means it's ready for you to connect to the database. And then now, to get more information on the database that you've just created, you click here. Then it's going to open all the configurations that we were doing previously. And then you will see here now, it's going to say what? This is your API. This is your database endpoint. So this is what we're going to use to connect to this database, this Postgres database, right? That is what we're going to use. So basically, that's that. And then it's going to show you the availability zone where it has hosted your, where it has actually hosted your application. Usually you can also see it here. Like I said, mine is on US East Virginia, which is US East 1. And then you've got the security groups publicly accessible. And then you've got the log events, configurations. Configuration is going to show you the master password and usernames, basically the configuration of your server on what it is, and etc. etc. So now, because we want to connect to it, the connectivity is that it's that one, and then you can quickly go to your PG admin, and then you just name your server, and then obviously connection, you're going to put in that endpoint that was created for you when you were creating your RDS instance, and then it's going to have a username. Sometimes it's going to want a password. The password is going to be, if for instance, for me, I'm not using that master username that I used. I'm using NodeStack because I've created a user for myself, because I don't want to, it's not recommended for you to use the root master username and password. So I had to create this login user role so that I can be able to access my database through that pod. Yeah, then the maintenance Postgres, this is where it's gonna back up and do all these other things. Like I said, for you to understand more about AWS services, you need to at least do the fundamentals course, right? Anyway, but now because I'm connected to the database, I'm going to do that. You can see I'm just refreshing. So I've got 3 users currently on my table, right? So everything is ready. And then let's go back to our backend code. So our backend code does what? It's connecting to that host, which is the host on AWS. That's the DB username. That's the DB password. That's the DB name. And then I've created the JWT secret, right? So now if I come here now and I run the server, let's run the server quickly, guys. Let's run the server, right? So Node.js server, let's run it. Let's see what happens. Hopefully it still works, because with coding, you never know. Okay, let's just give it a bit of time for it to run. There we go. You will see now it's going to say, it's giving me all those messages. You see, executing, whatever, level, database connection, level info message, database connection established. Then it's telling me all the other things as well, right? Then it's going to say server is running on localhost 3000. So it's like it's running locally on this port, but then now whatever API endpoints I pass to this address here, it knows that, oh, my database connection is connected via that. So this address doesn't really matter, because this is just for me to access the API, right? How that happens. So now I'm just gonna quickly show you. I've built the front end. Then we're gonna quickly, what we're going to do, we're going to continue this session on the next one, because next week we're not going to be doing a lot. So I'm going to do most of the logic on how we log in, register a user, reset password next week. So now I just want to show you the full application on how it actually works with the back end, and how we can set up a React application, so that we are ready for next week to actually start writing the logic, right? So I already have the application. Let me just quickly do a demo on that, so that it's easier to see and understand. Right. So now, because the backend is running, it's ready to listen to front end requests. So this is my front end. This is basically now my front end, where the front end is running, right? So basically, this is how the front end starts. So I decided to take one of my old projects that I was working on and just add a little bit, so that I can interface it, so that you see a real world working application that we are going to build, right? That we're still building actually. So now you will see here, it's more like I'm a software developer, then listing my tools, whatever. Then now we've got also a blog where the articles can be stored also on a database, and I get the information from the database. So these are just placeholder images, so that you are able to see. Now, the most important part is the login and register. So if I click on login and register, if you remember now, we've got these users, right? We've got an admin user. Their username is this, right? So now, if I come here and then I'm going to log in, don't worry, I remember the password. Then now you will see that it's going to log me in as an admin, right? Then you will see now the admin is logged in. So the admin has got the power to do what? To update the user, whether you're changing the role of the user to admin, or they're still remaining a user, or you just want to delete the user. For instance, let's delete Dumelo, right? So if we delete Dumelo, it's going to say user deleted successfully, right? Then if I come back here and then I run this script again, you will see Dumelo will cease to exist, right? There we go. Dumelo has been deleted, right? So now we've got Matlatsi, and then they're just a normal user, right? So now if I go back to here and then I say, no, Matlatsi, I don't want Matlatsi to be a user anymore. I want to make them an admin. Then you'll see immediately I change on the drop down, user role successfully updated. Then if I go back to the database and just refresh, you will see the user role has changed now. They are both admins, right? Then let me just quickly go back again. Let me just change them back so that you see the difference between a normal user and a user, right? So this will be Molato's email, and then I can just log out, and then let me log in as the normal user, right? So when I log in as the normal user, you will see this is a normal user dashboard. They don't have the admin privileges to delete anyone or update any role. So the only thing they can do is edit their details, and then they can change their password, then log out. So basically, we've differentiated between an admin and a normal user, right? Then we can also now register a new user. Let's say, for instance, let's register, let's just say Melsoft, and then last name is Academy. Then let's say AB at G. All right, and then I'm just gonna put in password normal. Then you will see now it's gonna say account created successfully. Click to log in. Then I can just come and say ab.g. Then I can log in now as Melsoft Academy. That's the name. Then you will see also everything that's happening here is that now if I come here and I refresh here, you will see now that Melsoft has been added to our database, right? So now this is the front end, right? It's working hand in hand with the back end, right? So let me quickly just show you in terms of when you log in, what really happens and what happens to communicate with the back end, right? Let me just zoom in. So this is our front end, right? So the page for us to log in is this one, right? So this is the login function, and then this is just the HTML and some CSS, Tailwind CSS that we are using to make that website to look the way it's looking, right? But now let's focus a lot more on the login functionality and in terms of what happens, right? So basically here now is that I've got login, I've got email and password that I'm entering, right? So after I get the email and password that I've entered and I've clicked on handle login on the button handle login function, asynchronously, it's going to come in and make an HTTP request, post request to this endpoint here, which is what? Localhost 3000 auth login. Now, where is this coming from? This is a URL to what? This is an endpoint to what? To our backend. So now if we come to our backend, if we come to our backend and the user is authenticating, if you remember correctly from our front end, we said what? Auth login. So you will see from the back end that it's going to come to this file here named what? Auth. So in other words, it's going to be localhost, and then it's gonna go to the file auth, and then within auth it's gonna come to what? Login, of which is this function here. That's basically what is happening when you send that GET request. And then now when it gets in here, it's gonna check if the emails exist or password and were entered. If not, please provide email and password. If they both were entered, it's gonna check the email if it exists. And then if it exists, then it's gonna start comparing the password that you've entered. Because here it's gonna say find one from the database where the email exists, and then the user, it's gonna return everything about that user, the user password, the user ID, the user whatever, it's gonna return it. Hence here we are comparing the entered password with the password that's on the database. But if you remember, the database password is what is encrypted. You can see it's encrypted. Hence now, when we are on our backend here, we are using what? Bcrypt to decrypt the user password so that it's plain, and we compare it with the one that is plain that you've entered. And then if the credentials are valid, it's going to create a JWT token that is valid for 1 hour. And then it's going to do what? Login successful. It's going to bring the token as well, and it's going to bring all the user details that the user has been successfully authenticated. Hence, you see that when you've been authenticated, it passes this data to the new dashboard so that I can be able to use that data. It returns that data. That data now returns where? To the front end. And then I can use now that data from the back end in the front end to do whatever I want with that information. So that's basically how this works. The same applies with the register, create account, whatever. So now I just want to quickly, so that we start a new React application. From starting that new React application, then I'm going to talk about the structure of a React application, so that when we start actually writing the logic, so that we also achieve exactly what I've written here by next week's lesson, so that you understand what is happening. So I just wanted to show you how it works. So now I'm going to show you how to set up a React application with Tailwind CSS, so that it's easy for you to do the styling, so that it looks a bit nice, like the one that I've created here. Because if you see, it's also mobile responsive. Also got the hamburger menu there. So yeah, it's quite interesting when you start seeing things coming together from your backend to your front end to your database, etc. So now from here onwards, I'm going to just open a new. Okay, let me just do this. I'm going to open a new workspace. Okay. You need to start a new one. Great. Sorry about that, because I don't know, it's taking time. Yeah. So now I've got this, and then I'm just gonna come here and I'm gonna open a folder. Right? Gonna open a folder, and then you're just gonna decide where you want to save it. So for me, I'm just gonna save it on live coding. Then let's call it. Let's see what we can call it. Let's just say Melsoft. Let's just say Melsoft. Then I'm just gonna select that. Then it's going to open up, and then from there onward, I'm going to need a terminal, right? So I'm just gonna open. Okay, you can just trust the authors there. So you're just gonna open the terminal. Okay, our terminal is open. So let me just zoom in a little bit so that you can see what I'm actually typing. So now you will see that we don't have anything within Melsoft. That's just the folder, right? So now from there onwards, what I can do is I can say you need to install Node.js first on your machine, right? So I've already installed Node.js on my machine. It's fairly easy to install that on your Windows or OS. So you install your Node.js first, and then after you've installed your Node.js, then you can just come and say npx create React app, and then you can give it a name. For instance, let's give it, let's just say my app, right? It's gonna take a bit of time to create that. While it's doing that, let me open something else so that I can explain that. Okay, it's still creating. So basically now it's going to create a generic folder structure for our React application, right? So that's what I'm going to speak about. So you'll see here now it's creating a new React app in that folder, whatsoever, and etc. etc. Right. So I just want to quickly open something else here as well so that you can see the folder structure of all the, yeah, so it's still installing React in the background. Oh, my machine is very slow, guys. My apologies. I don't know what's happening, but yeah, we'll fix that. All of a sudden, it just started being slow. So basically, this is a basic structure of a React application, right? So what do I mean when we say this is a basic structure of a React application? So at the root of your project, now, you typically will have this my app public folder, and then your source. Then within your source, you'll have assets, components, pages, services, hooks, app.js index, or whatsoever. And then you'll have your .env file. There's what you'll use for your sensitive information, etc., etc. Then you've got your README file. This is instructions on what your application does and how you can actually help the next person run your application if it's public, right? So now let's dive a little bit into each of the directory name and some best practices, right? I'm going to do things side by side. Okay, it's still installing so that we finish quickly. Right, so at the root level files, right, you see there you've got package.json. At the root level file, you've got package.json, right? This contains metadata about the project. So this is data about data. So this is metadata about the project. It includes the scripts, dependencies and configuration. This is a central file for your npm and is essential for managing your packages. For instance, when we're installing React DOM, for instance, for doing the routes and etc., and actually viewing the pages that we are creating. That's what I mean by npm packages, managing packages. And then you've got your .env file, stores environment variables like API keys, URLs, keep sensitive information here. Yeah, so typically they are not committed to version control for security reasons. This is what I mentioned when I said you don't push them to GitHub, etc. Then you've got the public folder, right? There is the public folder. So within the public folder contains static assets that are directly served by the server. For instance, it's going to have your index.html, which is the main HTML file React attaches to, right? Basically, typically there is a single div there with the root element where the React app is going to be rendered. So, and then you've got assets, right? You've got assets. There's also assets within your public folder, depending on how you want to put it. These are your images, your favicons. If they are static and don't need to be, bundled with by Webpack, this folder is public facing. So any file here can be accessed by direct URL path. So if you have images that you don't want direct URL path accessibility, don't put them within the public folder, right? Rather create another source, another folder within source with assets, and then you can put your images there, etc. Then let's go to the source file, right? The source folder. You've got assets, stores static assets like images, fonts, and icons that are bundled with the application. This is helpful if you need these assets only within the app, not directly accessible like publicly. So for instance, if I see an image on my website and someone wants to access it directly and etc. and download it, if they are within the source assets folder, it will not be directly accessible. But then if I put them in public, then I can have a direct URL to that and do whatever I need with that image, right? Then the next one, you've got components. So this houses reusable UI components like buttons, form inputs, models. So this folder can be further broken down if there are many components using subfolder or category-based organization. Like for instance, inside components, I might have a button, and then within that folder button, then I have a button component, and then I've got also the CSS for that specific button. So whenever I need to use that button anywhere within my code, I just need to call that component and I can reuse the code. So it's very important to have this component folder and understand how it works. Like for instance, if I've got the nav bar, I don't have to now code the nav bar for each single page. Like for instance, if I've got portfolio, I don't need to code a nav bar again for portfolio page. I can just call the nav bar within components and reuse the nav bar that I have across my application. That's how it is. So organizing components this way, it keeps each component's logic and styling, and any related files close together. So you know where is what, and you know how you can actually go and manipulate that, right? Let me quickly go back to our code. Yeah, it's taking time. I do not know why, but let's continue. Hopefully it will finish. Right, and then you've got services used for API requests, external service logic or backend integrations. Keeping API logic here keeps your components focused on the UI rather than data fetching, right? So you'll just call whatever API logic you need from your components from this folder here, which is services. You can rename it. This is just a basic structure. Maybe, for instance, you can rename it and say it's API, right? But services, that's where your API logic comes in, and all your components that need access to your API, calling APIs, will know where they are referencing their API calls and getting their calls, right? And then you've got utils. So now inside utils, this contains utility functions or helpers. What do I mean by that? These are functions that can be shared across the app. Like for instance, you want to format a date or you want to do certain calculations, but all those things can be shared across the application. So you'll put them within utils because you're going to reuse that as well within the code, right? And these functions are typically stateless and don't rely on the component structure. Yeah, so that's basically that. So it's just functions that you need to, that can be shared across your application, and you can reuse them. And then we've got what we call hooks, right? So custom React hooks for sharing logic between components. Hooks are prefixed with use, for instance, use fetch, use auth, and encapsulate reusable logic that leverages React hooks. For instance, if you saw on the code, let me just go up. An example of, let me go to the front end one. Like for instance, use navigate. This will be an example of a hook, because if I say use navigate, I know that it has encapsulated reusable logic that leverages the React hook. So I don't have to now always, I just need to recall that this hook, use navigate to do whatever it does, and then I know that it's going to perform whatever function it needs to perform. So that's basically what hooks are. And remember, they've got a prefixed name use. Then you'll know that's a React hook. And then now, if I was to carry on and say styles, for instance, inside styles, this is where it's going to hold your global styling files like CSS or CSS files, theme variables, utility styles like your colors. If you are using CSS in JS libraries like styled components, this folder might be optional, right? Especially even if you're going to use also Tailwind CSS, of which is what we're going to be using today. So yeah, that's basically how a React project file structure would look like. And then you will see how you can actually utilize this, and how you can reference all these different source files within your code base. So it's very important to understand the project structure and how it works. Let's go back and see if it's finished. Okay, okay, now I'm not sure why it's taking so long. But yeah, let me just close the others. Perhaps it should. But yeah, that's for you to understand. You see now it's still creating the other basic file structures of Node.js. So you'll see you've got node modules. I'll explain what this is. So far, you've got this one that I spoke about, data about your project. So you'll see that this is the name of your project is that is the version, and currently private. So it's still creating that. But this is the last stage, because this is the only part that it needs to do, because it's still populating the file structure, and then it's going to finish. So I think with that said, we can end today's class. Let's see if we have any questions. And then from next week onwards, we're going to dive deep into the exact logic. I'm going to explain the logic, how the front end actually works in more details, all the way to the back end, all the way to the database on AWS. We're going to get into that, and then so that you get a fully grasp on what's happening. So what I will do is I will push the front end code by weekend, probably on Sunday. So have a look so that you are a little bit prepared for next week's class, because it's going to be more intensive, because we're going to be dwelling deep into the logic and how it works, writing some few codes there and there. But then I'm going to write most of the code, because it's going to take us a long time to actually, for me to code everything down. So I think with that said, I don't see any questions on the chat. Okay, I see. Will this be recorded, be sent to our emails? I think this is a live stream also on YouTube. So immediately I end the lesson, it's going to be posted on YouTube. So you can check it out under Melsoft Academy on YouTube from session 1 up until today's session. So each time the session finishes, it gets uploaded to YouTube. I'm so confused and really want to catch up. I think this also applies to you. Go on YouTube and the Melsoft Academy, then you can follow up from the first week's lesson. Right. I think with that said, thank you very much, guys, for attending. I see there's consistency, because we always have at least 30 attendants. Yeah, and I look forward to seeing you on the 4th week as we dive more deeper into the logic on the front end. Thank you, guys, and have a lovely evening. Cheers.